Hey everybody, this is Kathleen Moss, and you're listening to A Breast Cancer Diary. This is part 2 of my 2-part series on advocacy for breast cancer patients or former patients who are thrivers and survivors. And if you didn't hear my first addition to this series, it was about the less intense ways to become an advocate, the ways to just dip your feet in the water and try it out. Less commitment, less intensity, less time involvement, less longevity to the commitment. That was last week. Now, this week, I'm going to be talking about the kinds of ways to become an advocate that are longer term, more time intensive, not necessarily, something you couldn't do in your evenings and weekends if you're still working full time, but a little bit more hardcore advocacy. And like I said last week, it's mainly in the niche areas, in the edges or the margins of breast cancer that you find opportunities to become an advocate, but not always. So I'm going to start out by talking about the more mainstream organizations that support breast cancer advocates, the ones that aren't fitting into any of those niche margin topics or populations. So as you may have guessed, Komen and the American Cancer Society are two of the most visible organizations that work with breast cancer survivors long term. They have mixed reviews. You either love them or you hate them. People who are critical of them are critical because a lot of the dollars they raise go back towards the bureaucracy of running their very, very large infrastructured organizations. So it's a little bit of criticism there. They're doing the best they can, making improvements, aware that they're being criticized. Komen will tend to want to partner with people around just fundraising and awareness raising and visibility for their campaigns. They have a couple of different campaigns nationwide. The main one is More Than Pink, and that's just their walks in different towns and cities. You can show up there, bring a team, and get your team to raise money for them, raise visibility for them, and they will be very happy. The other thing that Komen does is they train science advocates, and their program is called Advocates in Science, AIS. And once you sign up for that, you'll want to look in your email inbox to make sure and catch all the AIS emails. I am an advocate in science with Komen, and sometimes I don't know the name of the person that's emailing me from them, but usually they'll put the letters AIS in the email. So it's a very hands-off advocacy training. It's all online. It's very impersonal. You don't actually get to know any one person in particular. And that for me was hard. I like to do a little bit more personal work and be mentored and see people in person when possible. So AIS is a really good program that I recommend for those of you who are maybe introverts who don't want to travel across the country to go to an in-person advocacy training. And again, that is science advocacy. That is a very particular brand of advocacy. We have mainly 2 brands of advocacy, education and science. And then there's fundraising for those that want to just do fundraising. And then there's 4 that I'm going to talk about today. So education, that's peer-to-peer. Sometimes you can educate your clinician, but usually you're not trying to do that. And science is usually with regard to educating yourself in terms of research so that you can go and be an advocate in the research community. And then fundraising obviously is really easy. You just go out and raise funds for whatever organization you support. But then there's also legislative advocacy or lobbying, and that's another type of advocacy that you can do for certain types of nonprofit organizations that are not 501c3s. So I'll talk a little bit about that, but most of what I'm going to talk about today is about education and science. So some of my favorite organizations. Oh, and I was going to say the American Cancer Society. They're the other kind of mainstream, huge, monstrous organization that supports breast cancer patients in the world. And they do that by kind of gathering the science and reporting out on all the numbers. And every year there's, different statistics that come out from them. They also do a lot of funding for research, as Komen does. And they really like to team up with folks in the breast cancer community more personally choosing one or two representatives or ambassadors from the breast cancer community locally during the time that they are putting on a walk in the local community. So they will ask you to raise a certain amount of money as their ambassador, but also they will ask you to go out and publicly speak, maybe get on the news for them. So it's a little bit more of a partnership, and you'll be mentored a little bit more personally, but it's not educational in nature. It is very much fundraising, awareness raising, media raising for them and for their cause, not necessarily for you or for your cause. So beyond those two gigantic kind of global organizations, we've got all of the marginal ones. And so I'm going to list off a bunch of those. And I don't know a whole lot about all of these, but I know quite a bit about most of them. So I'll start out with some of the ones that I've been involved with that I can tell you personally about. My favorite one is called the National Breast Cancer Coalition. They are my favorite because they have invested the most in me. And they are a little bit more of an edgy research organization. So unlike Komen and maybe American Cancer Society, they're doing funding of kind of novel ideas in the breast cancer space. They're not investing as much in the kinds of studies and trials that we've been doing for decades and decades. So they have a little bit different edge on their standards for choosing the research that they will endorse. And they lobby for lots and lots of funding, mostly from government sources, every year. And then they also do more legislative lobbying. So that's what they do as an organization. But then the way that I interacted with them is they trained me to be an advocate in science. So just like Komen has their advocates in science, NBCC has their advocates in science, and you can be both at the same time. If you're really obsessed with science and the science of breast cancer, then I highly recommend being both. So NBCC, though, they train their advocates in person in San Diego every year. It's a highly competitive program. Not everybody gets in. You have to kind of prove that you're serious about advocacy before you apply. And one of the ways that you prove that you're serious about advocacy is by showing up to their leadership summit, which happens every May in Washington, D.C. So they are kind of like a bi-coastal organization. They have their big event every year in Washington, D.C. Everyone's invited to that every year consecutively. You can come over and over and over. And then they have their week-long training in San Diego every year, but that's only a one-time thing. And there are follow-up trainings, but most of those are online. And then they do have their legislative advocates that they train separately, and that's pretty much online. It's more of a Zoom-based training. But I really got a lot out of their Project Lead, which is their Advocacy in Science or Advocate in Science training in San Diego. And I did it backwards because I came to them straight after COVID. I got into the Project Lead, the week-long educational training in the science of breast cancer, before I went to the summit. I'm going to the summit next month for the first time, but I haven't been to the summit before. Most often you'll find that you are accepted into Project Lead after you've been to the summit. And Project Lead, what it is very intense day-long trainings by the scientific community. They bring in all the best scientists in breast cancer from all over the world, and you learn from them directly on all of the different parts of the science of breast cancer. So you learn about immunology, you learn about breast cancer research, how to look and pick apart a research, a trial, so that you know whether it's reliable. You learn about the different ways that media can spin that research to make it look more significant than it really is. And some of the more kind of controversial issues in the breast cancer research world, you kind of look into those too. So I highly recommend that if you're someone who's serious about advocacy and you really want to go the long haul and use your knowledge in breast cancer science long term. It is a big investment that they make. It is an expensive training, and there are scholarships for it. Usually they'll just pay for part of it. But if you have a sponsoring organization like I did, then your sponsoring organization can also provide you with a scholarship in many cases. So that organization that sent me to the MBCC's project lead is the Lobular Breast Cancer Alliance, and I am now an advocate for them. I am one of their official advocates after going through NBCC's program. And I started to work right away leading coordinating one of their programs, a local advocacy teams program. So the LBCA supports me in a lot of ways, but I also support them because I do a lot of volunteer work for them and kind of mentoring other newer advocates in an in-person local advocacy team setting. So you can join the Lobular Breast Cancer Alliance if you've had lobular breast cancer, or even if you haven't, if you're a caregiver or someone that cares a lot about lobular. Usually it's the patients that come to us. And there's lots of ways to get involved as an advocate with the Lobular Breast Cancer Alliance. It's one of the most open organizations, lots of ins, lots of opportunities, and those opportunities are made very clear on the website. There are committees that you can join. You can do more nationally based advocacy and education. You can do research advocacy. You can sign up to be a research advocate in lobular trials, and then the Lobular Breast Cancer Alliance will have your name on a list. And when a scientist comes to them to say, hey, I need a patient's perspective, then the Lobular Breast Cancer Alliance would call you and say, hey, this lab needs a patient's perspective. Usually that lab's not going to be in your backyard, but it might be, probably not. And then you can sign up to be on the team of people that review that trial in an ongoing way from the beginning to the end. And that's what we call advocates in science or advocates in research. Or you can just do your own local advocacy in your own community to raise awareness for lobular breast cancer, like I do, and like I help other people do. And that means not just showing up to walks, which would be great, but also showing up on October 15th, which is the Global Lobular Breast Cancer Awareness Day. It could mean that you're bringing flyers and literature to your local clinics and libraries of clinics or hospitals, or to your clinicians. It could mean all kinds of things. You could do fundraising for the LBCA, doing all kinds of advocacy, and they give you a whole big long list of ways that you can do that. You can do interviews for national media or local media. You can set up a table at a health fair. Just all kinds of ways to do advocacy with that organization. They're an excellent organization that supports their advocates very well. The next place on my list is around metastatic breast cancer, which in my experience and opinion needs a lot of support and awareness raising. And one of the organizations that has maybe a little bit less receptivity or paths of being able to join them is the MBCA. So not the LBCA, but the MBCA, which is Metastatic Breast Cancer Alliance. And they're at mbcalliance.org. And you can join them if you're an organization like the LBCA is a member. It's a group member. Or you can join them if you're a patient who has been metastatic. I tried to join them as an individual member since my mom was metastatic, as an advocate for metastatic breast cancer, and I was not accepted. So I think probably if you're not a metastatic patient, you may not be accepted as an individual member. But if you are accepted as an individual member, they're very supportive. They have regular meetings. They will give you support in terms of like scholarships to training events of your own choosing. And it's a very great network of resources. So they're going to provide educational resources and travel grants to get to different conferences to learn about metastatic breast cancer. Another organization that I work with closely is Stand Tall AFC. I've mentioned them a number of times in the podcast. And so I won't say a whole lot about them, but they are about the type of closure that you get after a mastectomy. And Stand Tall, we are really just focused on breast cancer walks. It's a very narrow path of advocacy. You can only be an advocate at Stand Tall if you are going to the breast cancer walks in your community and either leading a team of volunteer flatties that are willing to be seen as flatties. So whether they're wearing a shirt that says flat or whether they're taking their shirt off to be seen, it's just about visibility, support, and solidarity. And then if you've done that kind of leadership, if you led a team in the past, you can move up to the next responsibility level and do a table. And so I kind of mentor people around tabling, and tabling at walks is very different than leading a team at walks. It is much more conversational, much more educational. There are, brochures and literature and things you can hand out and use as your kind of prompts when you're just getting rolling. So it shouldn't be something you're too intimidated to do, but it is very much of an educational role. And so Stand Tall AFC has that place in the breast cancer world of just showing up to breast cancer walks and breast cancer events and either showing visibility or educating folks that walk up to your table. Another flat oriented organization that's a little different is Stand Tall's umbrella organization, which is a nonprofit called notputtingonashirt.org. And they are doing a kind of a legislative project where they're seeking to amend the wording to the WHCRA Act. It's the Women's Health and Cancer Rights Act, and they are seeking to just put a couple of words in that would make it a little bit more likely that flat closure would be funded by insurance in all cases across the board, just the way that implants are funded by insurance in all cases, which is what the WHCRA was created to ensure. So that's a very niche little path of advocacy, but I will put that link down below so that if you're passionate about the WHCRA and adding those two words, so it's not just paying for reconstruction, but reconstruction or chest wall reconstruction. The chest wall is the two words that we're seeking to add. So that's a very, very, very niche area of advocacy, but very legitimate for many of us, including myself. And so I'll put the link down below to let you look into that if you're interested. The Triple Negative Breast Cancer Foundation. This is one I don't know as much about. This is one that is, I think they're the main contact for triple negative advocacy in the world. And the main thing they do is they allow you to help them fundraise. So it is pretty simple. There's not a lot of paths into the actual work that they're doing, as far as I can tell. It's mostly about fundraising, or you can receive support from them in terms of getting into a support group or something like that too. And then some of the organizations that are oriented around women of color and their needs are Tiger Lily at tigerlilyfoundation.org. They are mostly concerned about equity, and they have a really beautiful program that they allow everyone, I think everyone can apply to be an advocate for them. So they have their own advocacy program. It's called Angels. And I think it's mostly geared toward younger women who are breast cancer survivors. And it's mostly geared toward advocates pushing for equity in the healthcare setting for people of color, women of color. So if you become an advocate for them, you're mostly going to be advocating for women of color, even if you aren't a woman of color. But most of their advocates are women of color. But they're very, very inclusive. I felt very much embraced by them when I met them at the San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposium. They were not only interested in partnering with women of color. I'm very much not in that population. So I'm just, Northern European in my ancestry. So, but they were very interested in allowing me to fill out the angel application to become an angel advocate. So I love that. I love them. And the other one that I've interacted with a little bit in those same spaces at Project Lead and the San Antonio Symposium is For the Breast of Us. And their website is breastofus.com. And they are a little bit less, I think they have a very small staff. I can't tell that whether they're interacting with folks very much on the advocacy in terms of like mentoring or supporting advocates in their space, but they are very much educating and giving lots of resources. So if you're wanting to be kind of a solo advocate and receive from them the resources that they have to give around advocating for women of color and breast cancer, I think they're amazing. They're really good at kind of redefining things in their own terms. So they don't say allies, they say accomplices, and they have a little training for accomplices, again, for people who aren't women of color who want to be allies, what we call allies in this space. They call them accomplices, so more like partners than just allies. And so their website is extensive. It's really full of resources, but you can't. I don't think they even have a newsletter. They don't have a lot of interaction, I guess is what I'm saying. They're supportive of advocacy, but they're not training or supporting advocates or communicating every month with advocates the way that the LBCA does, for example. But they do have a great podcast. And I think that if you got involved in reading their blog or listening to their podcast, you'd probably find some ways in to connect with them. Because I know they do send advocates to Project Lead. So they must have some ambassadors in some respect. So yeah, I encourage you to learn more about them. Let's see. Young Survival Coalition. So they're youngsurvival.org is the website. They have mostly science and legislative advocacy programs, and they have in-person events. Their in-person events are more educational. They're just educating you generally about the breast cancer as a young survivor and bringing people together. They're not really training you to be an advocate exactly, although I think there's some crossover there. But they do have on their website, they have great resources. And if you want to be a science advocate or a legislative advocate, they have pathways for you to follow that are on their website. And then a really small niche, little marginal population in the breast cancer community, even smaller than lobular and triple negative, is something called inflammatory breast cancer. The main place to go if you want to advocate for that population is, it's called the ibcnetwork.org. So the Inflammatory Breast Cancer Network.org. They are kind of the place to go for resources and for connection. And I've got a couple other organizations that I know very little about. Project Life MBC. So Project Life MBC is only for metastatic breast cancer patients. They have a lot of supportive resources and education to help people feel a little bit more prepared to be a metastatic breast cancer patient. But they also have a couple of advocacy avenues that they have for people who want to become advocates. Most of their advocates are folks that have been advocating for a while individually and then have decided to start volunteering for them as educators. And so that's the folks I know who are involved as advocates with Project Life are folks who have been pretty active in the advocacy space, and they either teach a class or offer a support group or do something, give back to the community in that way, online mostly. So almost all of their offerings are online at Project Life. But Project Life also has a very, very niched area for metastatic breast cancer patients who are queer or LGBTQ. So they have one little part of their website that is just this one little project for advocacy and awareness raising around folks who have metastatic breast cancer in that population. So I will link to that below as well. And then there are a couple of organizations that don't do a whole lot of advocacy, but I just want to mention because I feel like they also do a lot of good in the world and probably will be doing some sort of advocacy just by nature of the fact that they're growing tremendously these days. So the Breasties is one of them. And the Breasties is a very general organization. It's just supporting women who've had breast and gynecological cancers. And the main way that they support women is just by having fun. So they just have this camp every year that has incredible funding, incredible opportunities to like dance and swim and just be childish together like you do when you go to camp. And then also hear from panels and experts and learn a little bit in education. And then the Breasties, they do their own advocacy. So if you wanted to like be on their board or take a leadership position with them, I think they do advocacy, but they don't really partner with patients a ton around advocacy. That's my impression. Just looking at their website and trying to understand what they're offering. I may be wrong about that, but they do have some things they're boasting about doing in terms of the advocacy space, but I think it's just their leadership team that does it. And then there's an organization called Cancer Culture, And it is very event driven, and it is on the East Coast. It's in Virginia. So for those of us on the West Coast, we probably won't really interact much with cancer culture. But I just wanted to mention them for those who are on the East Coast and you're interested in more of an artistic, kind of event based and aesthetic based organization. They started kind of in the realm of art and fashion, I believe. And so they have a very flamboyant kind of affect, and like I said, it's all in-person event based. It's not online at all. Another place that I've heard about through in different conferences that I've gone to that's very curious to me is an organization called MakeCancerLessShitty.com. And they are all about the side effects of cancer, and not just breast cancer, but all cancers. The drugs that we take, the chemo that we take, the long-term metastatic drugs all have just horrendous side effects, usually including diarrhea. And so that's why they chose that title. And they're, as you can imagine, they are very edgy in their approach. And they do have specific ambassadors that they have partnered with that go out and talk about how difficult it is to live with cancer and how much we need drugs that are less harsh. And so you can apply to be a partner or an advocate ambassador with them specifically, and then they will allow you to have some resources to go out and talk, maybe do some public speaking. And I think it's mostly awareness raising around just the symptoms and making sure that doctors know and don't minimize the intensity of the quality of life sacrifices that we make as cancer patients. So it's kind of a political issue, I guess, in the medical space, and it's a very, very niched focus. And I think it's really cool. Okay, that's a lot. Now, I wanted to say too that a lot of advocates that I know will also do their own research into how to go and find people in their own places, their own cities and towns that are doing important work in breast cancer. And I would say that that happens on a very grassroots level just by looking and listening and learning. I have learned so many different labs that are doing cancer research. Well, a lot of them are going to lose their funding in October because of all the crazy governmental cuts that have been happening. But right now, there are a lot of universities and a lot of cancer centers that are doing very good research. And if you have a specific interest in a certain type of research, either a type of cancer, breast cancer, that you are passionate about, or a certain type of approach, like a lot of us are more interested in the more holistic trials and what we can do with lifestyle and not as drug centered. So you might find a lab in your community that is doing the kind of research that you're most interested in. And you can, as a free agent, as an individual human, you can partner with them as an advocate in various ways. Also, it would be best to go to a training like the Komen Advocacy in Science or Project Lead first, so that you can speak the language and kind of get the lay of the land. But even if you didn't, there's a chance to learn from them, get a tour of their lab, for example, or just let them know that you're available if they ever want a patient's perspective. If they ever want to bring in a patient advocate on their team in one of their research trials or studies, you could be available to them to do that. So I have an example of this that my friend Anna lives in Tucson, and I was learning because I'm a nutritionist. I'm involved in integrative oncology talks and seminars all the time. And one of the experts on exercise oncology that I was learning from in one of my seminars happened to be stationed at, I think it's the University of Arizona or something in Tucson. And my friend Anna is interested in holistic approaches to breast cancer. And so I emailed her and said, hey, here's the name of this guy. He's just down the street from you. You may want to talk to him. Just email him and see what he's got going and if he has anything that you could help him with. She had already been trained a little bit to be an advocate, to be confident in the advocate space. And so she reached out to him, and I'm not sure how it went, but that is kind of some of the connections that don't happen really super easily until you start just kind of placing yourself in the breast cancer community and the scientific community in particular. which you can do by going to annual conferences. And the best one to go to is in San Antonio. So in San Antonio, the world comes to one place every year in December, early December usually, and talks about what they've learned about breast cancer. So everyone who's studying breast cancer of all types comes, and in all ways, so not just with drugs, but with lifestyle also, they come together, and there's just thousands and thousands of people learning together about breast cancer. It's just the most amazing environment. I just love it. And it's pretty affordable for an advocate to go there. They get a reduced rate. I think I paid like $50 or something like that, maybe $60. But you do need a sponsoring organization. So you have to be advocating for or with a nonprofit or an agency or an organization of some sort in order to get that reduced rate. And you do have to pay for your plane and, your hotel and everything too, of course. But if you're advocating with an organization, some of those organizations do have money to help you get there and for your hotel and everything too. And then there's ASCO, which is all of the cancers, which to me would be way too overwhelming. I don't have much desire to go and learn about all of the cancers myself, but somebody might. You might be interested in that conference. But the new conference that I've heard about for the last couple of years that I really want to go to that kind of moves around the country is the one for the Society for Integrative Oncology. They have a conference annually, and I think it's in Chicago this year. I think it's coming up soon in Chicago, and so I'm not going to that this year, but you may see me there next year because I'm really interested in integrative oncology, and I'd love to see the best of the best in that space. Now, lobular breast cancer also has, it has been annual, but I think it's going to turn to every other year. Starting this year, we're not going to have one, but in the fall of every year up until now, there has been the Lobular Breast Cancer Symposium, and it was in Philadelphia a couple years ago, and then last year it was overseas in Belgium, and next year in 2026, it's going to be in San Francisco, and so I will definitely be there. That's close enough to home that I can make it very easily. Now, you can find little tiny organizations in your own community to do good work also. Like I do a monthly craft night in a satellite group for people who live near me with a local breast cancer support organization. And I guess that's kind of advocacy, because when people come together, we end up doing education and we converse about resources. So I'm educating folks just by nature of being with them in person. And you might have a local breast cancer organization that does a lot of good work, and maybe you can reach out to them and see where your talents match their needs and see if they need someone to lead a support group, or if they need someone to lead a craft night or a walk, some kind of in-person activity that would support breast cancer patients that are feeling isolated. That would be a great opportunity to be an educational advocate as well, because like I said, if you're being around people, just naturally you're going to be sharing your experience with them, and your experience means so much to them, being new to this space and being a new patient and just not having a whole lot of information. So there are little ways to do educational advocacy as well that aren't as, not as long-term commitment or reaching across the country and working with people from all over. So you can find little small ways to contribute as well. But that is kind of the summary of the more complex and intense ways to become an advocate. I started this series because someone reached out to me who had lobular breast cancer, or a type of lobular breast cancer. And she didn't know that she could get involved. She was just like, what do you mean when you say advocacy? Do you really mean that there's a room for me as a new patient to come in and do some work and just, team up and partner up with others that have been there and really know a lot more than I do? And the answer is yes, absolutely. Almost all of the organizations that I mentioned today are very happy to receive one more person on their team and to support you in the ways that they do. So don't be shy. Introduce yourself to the executive director. Most of these organizations are quite small, and the executive director that's their job, is to get to know new people in the community, make connections. So they may not be the one that you work with long term, but you can introduce yourself to them and see where you might fit best in their organization. You can always ask, even if they don't have the infrastructure to support you long term as an advocate or as a representative of their organization. If you're a fan of what they're doing, they're going to want to hear from you. They need that. They need fans. They need people to take their message out into the world. And chances are at least they would give you a gig, tabling for them or support you and educate you enough to be a representative in your community. I have a lot of interviews coming up. Some really interesting folks. A long-term survivor of metastatic breast cancer, someone I'm really excited to talk to, Heather Jose, is coming up soon. And I have someone from across the pond, Andrea Molding, who also has a podcast focused on breast cancer and humor, that will be a guest of mine soon. I will be a guest of hers as well. And a couple of other new podcast creators from Australia will be guests of mine. From Breast Case Scenario, I'm also going to be a guest of theirs, and have already recorded an interview with them for their podcast. So I will be following this one up with probably a couple interviews in a row, since I've had a couple of non-interview episodes in a row. So look for that. And of course, if you don't know about my new Substack, I always want to plug that. Make sure you look for me at abreastcancerdiary.substack.com. So that's just the website to subscribe, and you can get that newsletter. It's a weekly newsletter, or maybe 3 times a month, in your email inbox. And if you have the Substack app, you can follow me there without getting an email in your email inbox. And I will talk to you next week.